get to see people.
Thank you for joining us for the ACA Small Business Bootcamp for this Tuesday, August 9th. We're excited to have everybody with us. I'm Robert Theobald, I'm the Small Business Ombudsman and Vice President of Small Business Services here at the Arizona Commerce Authority, and be your host today. We'd like to start by thanking all of those community partners that help us with these boot camps. We could not do these boot camps without their time, their effort, and their expertise. They are all great partners, and we appreciate them very much. For those not familiar, the Small Business Boot Camp is designed to help small businesses prepare, plan, and grow. It is a statewide initiative supported by all of our community partners. And not only is it the Tuesday 9 a.m. webinars that we do every week, it is also a content library and a series of workshops. So let's talk about the content library. When we started the boot camps, we started by back in April of 2020, and since our very first one, we recorded every session. And those recordings are posted on our website down in the content library. That leaves us with a content library of over 200 webinars that are recorded and presented by experts that you can go back and view at any time and download the slide decks and watch the videos. So it's a great resource available. You can watch it again at any time of the day, whatever fits your schedule and your needs. As you can see, you can sort that content library through 7 different topics or categories and find the bootcamp webinars that fall within those topics. If you can't find something and you're looking, something specific, feel free to reach out to Faith or myself, and we can guide you to the webinar you might be looking for as well. So with that, we have some other programs that the ACA offers that everybody can leverage. We have our small business services, our workforce division, and our Arizona MEP. And these programs are there to help support small businesses as they start and grow and expand. And so if you have additional questions about those, again, reach out to us. Another great program for those entrepreneurs starting a business or looking to expand their business into other areas is our small business checklist. This is an online interactive tool designed to help entrepreneurs and business owners understand the licensing, registration, and compliance needs at the local, state, and federal level. You can also find additional business support tools in this program, and it is available on our website. You've got the long website list down there, or you can do azcommerce.com/smallbiz, and that will take you to the checklist program as well. The checklist program is extremely in-depth. It can create a big long checklist with the information you need. But if you just need a quick answer or something short, you can also try our virtual assistant, Sally. You can see Sally's picture there in the lower right-hand part of that screen. And that's kind of the speedier way to get some information. But for full details, again, you want to jump into the checklist program. So with that, we want to touch on a few updates. We'll post this information in the chat. But the ADOT, DBE, and Small Business Transportation Expo is coming up, as well as the Arizona Innovation Challenge is open for those tech startups. The Arizona Innovation Challenge is a premier business plan competition for Arizona companies, but it is an awesome program that has one of the best in the country. So please take a look at that if it fits your needs. But again, we will post information for both of these in the chat. So with that, let's look at some of the upcoming sessions. You'll notice right here on August 11th, this Thursday, is a workshop. As I mentioned, the Small Business Boot Camp has some workshops in it. This is our 3rd workshop in partnership with the Phoenix Business Journal. And it's Grow Your Business, Access to Capital, and Other Resources as you look to grow your business. So we're going to have the experts from Wells Fargo, Gallagher and Kennedy, REW, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and the SBDC, the Small Business Development Centers, there to help identify some of the things that they provide and things you should know as you're looking to grow and scale your business. It is a 3-hour workshop. There is a little bit of room in person, but there is an online option as well. We will do hybrid for that. And so hopefully you can join us on Thursday. On the registration website. You can see the agenda. So if you just want to hop in for a part of it, you're welcome to do that as well. So you don't have to stay for the full 3 hours. So with that, we have our upcoming sessions on Tuesday, August 16th. How to grow your customer base using the power of local SEO. This is a great presentation with great presenters with our friends at Localfy, so please join us there. And then how to create a marketing strategy to skyrocket business growth. We've got Nicole Zeno is going to be with us for the first time, and she's got a great business and story, so we're looking forward to her presentation as well. So with that, we're going to jump into today's session. We have Deborah Hensel from the University of Arizona, Eller College of Management with us. She's been with us before. She does a great job, and so we're looking forward to this presentation today. And when she's done today, she gets to head over and teach her class with her MBA students. So we're glad we could fit her in. So with that, Deborah, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and turn the time over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Whoops. Saw the chat there.
Yeah, so while Deborah's pulling that up and getting ready, just a reminder, everybody, please put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and then we can use the chat for other chat related stuff, but we don't want your questions to get lost in the chat. So with that, Deborah, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. So the topic today, managing teams, rebuilding and refocusing. And I don't know about you all, but I think we've been doing that at the start of the pandemic and then post the pandemic. So really want to share a little bit from some of our research about what's worked well, what's not worked well during the past several months regarding teams. And I really would like as much of this to be interactive as possible. So I'll have some times pretty soon starting out with some chat, sharing my own observations, research and observations about the current challenge. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the stages of team development and try to have you understand and kind of identify where you think your team is, and most importantly, what you can do to rebuild and refocus it. And then lastly, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term psychological safety, but it was always important. And then what we found is that post-pandemic, it's even becoming more important. And to have leaders that are encouraging an environment of psychological safety so that people are really feeling comfortable and confident with sharing kind of what's going on without fear of repercussion, both to you as a leader and then also within their teams. Okay, so our first interactive exercise. What is one word that you would use to describe your team over the last few months? Okay, and just one word, and we'll see what you come up with in chat. That'll also give me an idea of kind of what's going on. Oh, tense. What else? Disconnected. Tense, disconnected. Maybe Robert, you could, because when I'm looking at the chat, it's showing the whole screen. Maybe if you wouldn't mind, you could call them off for me.
Sorry about that. I was talking and I had mute on. Yeah. So resilience, stressed, fragmented, survivors, fantastic, distance, tired, disconnected, flexible, tense, exhausted.
I sometimes feel that way too. I hear a lot of people talk about feeling exhausted because they're still going from one thing to the next. Terrific, thank you. What's interesting is that it's a mix of both some positives as well as some challenges. The flexibility with as a positive, and resilience with some positive, and also the exhaustion. So one of the things that we find is that there are some typical and normal stages of team development. And some of you, this may be a refresher. And so when teams first come together, they're doing what's called the forming. they're, kind of not sure sort of why they're here. There's some, they're looking for some guidance and direction. And, things start to gel a little bit. And then you get into what's called the storming stage, when people are finally saying, hey, I'm kind of, no, I'm here. There starts to be some conflict either around roles or what it is that we're trying to do. And then hopefully that gets resolved and there starts to be some agreement and consensus. People start getting more clear about their roles and et cetera. And then hopefully we go on to performing. If it's not an intact team, there might be some adjourning, but it goes through some natural, normal cycles. And one of the things that I should say is that a team could be performing and then it could get an influx of new members. Some other things could happen and it could actually digress back to the storming stage. So it's really important as a leader to kind of understand where your team is. And that's one of the things I'll ask you at the end, is almost to diagnose where your team is and what are some of the things that might be more effective for it. What we found that's really interesting, and a colleague of mine at the university kind of looked at this, is that kind of COVID-19 for teams and for organizations really had an inflection point. And actually you could see this by some of your comments, where you probably had some energy. There was an opportunity for processes to be revisited. There was probably a lot of flexibility, as some of you said, and the team could have actually turbocharged and taken off. And then you also had almost the contrary, which was, and this is a little bit, I think, what some of you may have said, disconnected, that, people were, if they were working remotely, starting to do more individual work. We've been finding there are a lot of mental health challenges and people suffering from isolation, and you might have actually had the team faltering somewhat. And there's probably some in between, but our research has said it seems to be kind of at the top or the bottom. And so I want you to think about that as we're going through. Now, I put this slide up here is because, and again, this is how we started, that really during the pandemic, there were, again, you see a lot of the positives. People rallied together. There was productivity. There was people were kind of excited about working remotely. There were some successes. It also, for a lot of people, it cast a broader net for recruiting. So if jobs could be done remotely, then you could really expand your recruiting tool. And as we all know that people in, one of my clients is the produce industry. They were kind of the heroes of the pandemic, as were a lot of retail workers, et cetera. Now, what we've also seen is that there were also some gaps and negatives. And there, some people, call it, there were those water cooler conversations, the hallway conversations, where people would just say, hey, I'm thinking about this, or they go kind of right next to the person at the office and look for connection. That was really gone. I have one client that's a consulting firm, and they said, we lost those whiteboard moments where you could, where people would huddle around, you kind of go through a knotty problem. One of the things we've also found is that it was difficulty by doing virtual onboarding and virtual team building, especially onboarding. The research says, and a lot of commentary, it was just difficult to replicate that in the power of kind of that one-on-one introduction, seeing the office, et cetera, et cetera. People were trying to replicate some of those hallway conversations with social time. There were the virtual coffees, happy hours, and sometimes those went okay, but sometimes they seemed a bit forced. The other one, and this we find is still happening now, is that though it used to be that going home, and for people going home was really a safe haven, and you could feel like when you were at home, you were able to relax, the phone could go into another room. And people right now, in our research is showing, in my own personal experience, is that the boundaries of work and home have really been blurred. And people are really experiencing a lot of burnout now, working a lot of hours. When they get home, they still see that could be my office. I'm needing to kind of answer the phone really quickly. I'm needing to be on. And so that's a big issue. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Productivity, most of the research says productivity is actually increased since the pandemic. There are still some industries that are questioning that. And one of the interesting things is, and Robert and I were actually talking about this, you've got some managers that are still wanting to bring people back to the office. They want to actually see what they're doing. They want to kind of get that face time, and this kind of transition from kind of activity that you're doing to results has still been a little slow. And quite honestly, we're all still grappling with that. And trust in management has been put through the test the last couple of almost 3 years. And some of the what we're seeing as gaps in the leadership have become really, really obvious. Managers who are just not sensitive of what's been going on for people, either some of the work family issues. Someone was telling me of one colleague that they had who's lost 3 people during the pandemic. So anything you'd like to put in the chat now would be really helpful, either additional positives that you all have felt or potential negatives that we haven't talked about. And Robert, I'm going to give you a heads up if you could monitor the chat if some things come in. So I'd appreciate that. So anything that comes in, either additional positives that you've seen or additional negatives that you've seen. Well, I don't see anything come in, so maybe I really got that pretty good. Hit the nail on the head there. I'll continue going, but please feel free to put some things in chat. So here's some issues that we found post-pandemic, and I saw one come in.
Yeah, it says positive going from no to remote to understanding it does work.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Good, thank you. So some of the typical team issues that we've been finding post-pandemic is, and I'm sure you've all seen a lot of the research and a lot of the writing about the Great Resignation. Some have called it the Great Reshuffling, but there have been, people took this as a lot of opportunity to kind of really rethink what they were doing, rethink where they were doing it. And you still got a lot of movement in the job market and in the talent market, even with the uncertainty of the economy. And anecdotally, a lot of my clients have said they're finding young people that are leaving sometimes in less than a year. And not really quite exactly sure why. And then there was just an article in the Wall Street Journal, I think a couple of weeks ago, that people who have jumped ship are now really regretting it. So bottom line, though, is there's still a lot of churn. People are still kind of questioning what it is that they're doing. We've also found, again, I mentioned this, that you'll see some departures that have happened post-pandemic because of onboarding or integrating remotely, and that just hasn't been as effective. And so when people are almost, when they do start meeting people, it's almost like a little bit too late. I don't know about you all, but in many industries, there's still a scarcity of talent. There's still a wage, even though inflation is going up, wages are still going up, and it's difficult for companies to actually keep pace with inflation. The one thing that I have found, and this is almost with every client, is that the workload, people are saying we're doing, because of the scarcity of talent, people that are in the roles are doing more with less. And the heavy workload is really falling on some of the more seasoned, more tenured employees. Staffing challenges. I'm doing a big program for Honor Health, and I did some needs assessment in the beginning, and just staffing is just, and potential burnout is the #1 issue. The other thing that we're finding too is that some companies, like one of my clients, they've brought in, it's a mid-sized business, 240 altogether. They've brought in, because of turnover, 71 new employees since January. And they just did an engagement survey and found that while the new employees are pretty engaged, and that's a positive, the 5 to 10-year tenured employees are really not as engaged, and they're the ones that are having to kind of pick up the slack for getting these new employees trained. So part of what to think about too is who's on your team and kind of what are some of their challenges. People are struggling, that we know, and you've probably seen some of the articles about the future of work, and work has changed, and everybody knows it will never be the same, but people are really struggling with kind of what are we changing to, and that end state is really, really unknown. The other thing, and again, I'm finding this with my clients, with this same client that's about 240, probably, there are at least 15 employees who have some sort of mental health challenges. We have, probably within that client, maybe 5 or 6 who are suffering from depression, who have probably been isolated a little bit too much, having difficulty kind of getting back into the workplace. And then lastly, there's most companies, a colleague and I did a webinar for Raytheon about a month or so ago. We couldn't believe it. We had 600 people on, because everybody's just really struggling with remote work, hybrid work. What are the practices? There have been some confusing and inconsistent messaging around that. Again, please feel free. I'll kind of stop and pause here. Please feel free. Robert, I hope you're still there. I see we've got one, a new chat that was entered.
Yep, it says in certain sectors, remote and hybrid is here to stay.
Yep.
Management employees need to have the right tools to be effective.
Yep, totally. Yeah. And there's, whether you like it or not, you're exactly right. And what are the tools, technology? I was talking with one client yesterday, and kind of getting the right technology. So documents could be downloaded really quickly and efficiently in the individual's home, for productivity. So please, yeah, keep any of those coming. So I want to just do a little bit on kind of flexible hybrid work, and then I'll kind of venture back into teams, because it is all interrelated. So these are some stats from McKinsey, the big consulting firm, last year. And C-suite executives, senior level people, they still think it's going to be the office. And then you see exhibit 2, and employees are saying, I don't think so, not so fast. We really like this. And this is part of the struggle, is that people have gotten used to flexible work environments. They've gotten into rhythms and routines that really fit their needs. And some of my clients have said, why should I go back in the office? And then we're all staring at computer screens. And so as leaders, how to really manage both of those. One of the best practices is, if people are going to come into the office, they really need to have some meaningful work within their teams that they're going to do. You've probably heard the stories. People come in, and people are in offices, and they're just staring at screens and doing team meetings. So I pulled together, I won't go over these in detail. We'll send out the slides, but some of the flexible workplace practices that companies have been doing are listed here. And I think the big takeaway is there's no silver bullet, and most companies are trying to figure out how to experiment, how to recalibrate, and how to just continue to be more iterative. The one thing, and I'm going to say this one more time, because it's so critical, and it's that third bullet there, is just people have been more intentional and spending more time on how is it that we work. And one team may work differently than another. What does that mean for our workflows, our schedules? If we have meetings, what meetings might be more effective in person and what can be sometimes more effective in a virtual world. And if people are going to be in person in the office, really having some intentionality and planning for those. So whether it be, team learning, whether it's some team brainstorming, but really having some intentionality. The other thing that's been interesting too is that there's been a lot more focus and again, a lot of research on understanding each of our productivity and well-being needs. And so, for example, myself, one of the things that I've learned is if I have something where I need a block of time to just sit and work through it, that's probably something that I'm more productive at home. When I'm in an office with one of my clients, I'm usually, people are grabbing me to do things. So really understanding your own personal productivity and also the productivity needs of your individuals. The other thing that we're finding is, and this is companies are, some companies have said, let's try to target 2 to 3 days in person as some soft goals, but they're not mandating it. And the companies that are mandating office time have really resulted in a big backlash. So, but they're trying to say, let's try to get some soft goals around that. Let's also try to be intentional and do some contracting for if people are going to be working remotely. Let's talk about what that means around availability, whether you're servicing internal clients, external clients, or servicing each other. And I've had some clients where they say, I've got some people, they're just missing in action. I can't find them. I try to reach out for them. They're not there. And, I said, this is the time to really do some contracting and get some clarity of what the rules are, the new rules of the game. Some statistics here. Again, you've probably seen some of these. There can be your cost savings here around working remotely. Some workers are actually saying, I'll take less pay. I really like this working remotely. I can stay home with my kids, or now, I don't have to pay for childcare, et cetera, et cetera. So I think as one person said, yeah, it's here to stay, and we kind of have to figure out how to work with it. So I want to bring this back to teamwork. And this is the opportunity for you to understand in that initial stages of team development to where your team is and what it might need. One of the things that we found is that sometimes when people are disconnected, going back to the basics. And this is some research in a pretty standard model for high performing teamwork. And sometimes when I will get called into an organization and they'll say, my team's not working well, people are just not getting along. And the presenting problem seems to be interpersonal relationships. But oftentimes when that's the presenting symptom, the root cause is people are not clear on what the goals are. What are the goals of our particular organization, our particular team? Having accountability and consequences for achieving those goals or not. But it's that old kind of where are we going? And one of the things that we found is that during the pandemic and the post-pandemic, during the pandemic, people were just kind of doing whatever they could to just make sure they survive with their business. And sometimes they would kind of venture outside whatever their business charter was, just to kind of look at some additional services or things like that. And while that was good, kind of post-pandemic, when things have hopefully stabilized, to go back and say, what is it that we're all about? And secondly, along that is having clear roles, decision rights, how the work is going to be organized. And again, if you're in a hybrid work environment, you may need to go back to some of the basics around this as well. And as I mentioned, I just did an engagement survey for a particular client. And one of the top things that came out as needed that was hindering engagement was people really needed more clarity on their roles. What's my role? What's expected of me? Again, some things may have changed, but really at the end of the day, people need to know what's my role, what does good look like, and what's expected of me. So clear goals, clear roles, and the next is clear processes and procedures. And again, this may have changed or evolved over the last almost 3 years. How do we want to work together? When we have meetings, whether virtual, hybrid, I don't know about you all, but having hybrid meetings, I'm still challenged with that because it's some organizations, they're trying to have some people be in person, but some people are not. And how do you get that rhythm going about how you'll work together? And that's a separate thing. And there's some good readings on this as well, but how to make hybrid meetings work. But how are we going to work together? What does that look like? How often do we want to meet as a team? What's our cadence for how we communicate and share information? How do we have what I call passionate debate and constructive debate? How do you make sure all voices are really heard in that? But high performing teams have this really clearly laid out. Just working with a team a few weeks ago where it was an executive team that was just forming. And the first thing that I worked with them with on just what were going to be their team agreements. When they got together, what was that going to look like? How were they going to reach decisions? How were they going to treat each other? And they actually came up with a set of agreements. In the materials that will be sent out to you, actually in the appendix, there are some sample team agreements and just getting everybody on the same page. And last but not least, and clarity of goals, roles, procedures, and processes accounts for about 80% of effective teamwork. And interpersonal relationships are only about 20%. And that's really around listening, mutual trust and support. And I'm going to talk in a few minutes about psychological safety and the importance of it. But if your teams are struggling right now, and if they're in an early stage of their development, use this as a diagnostic to say, how clear are the goals? The other thing that's not in here is, and really there's been a lot more discussion about this post-pandemic, is that going through the pandemic, a lot of people, as we mentioned, took it as a time to reevaluate their work, what they're doing, and really looked at does the work I do have meaning? What's my real purpose for what I'm doing? And this has become much more important for people. And so it's not on this particular slide, but it's around the why. Why is our organization actually in business? Who is it that we serve, and why are we doing that? And to help people connect the dots, and to help people connect the dots between what their role is and how that's contributing to the bigger picture. And this has been particularly difficult lately, because when you're short-staffed and your people are carrying a heavy workload, it's sometimes you say, oh, I just don't have time to really explain why we're doing this, the why in this, and help people to connect the dots. But I'll tell you, if you don't, that's going to result in people that are less engaged in the work, and people who, again, just may not be as committed. So this is that delicate balance of spending time with people, helping them to connect the dots, and still being able to capture the heavy workload. So I want you to kind of take a minute. This is reflection, application of your own self, but I'm going to ask you to share it in the chat. What stage do you think your team is in right now? What intervention or interventions are needed? When I say intervention, it might be going back to pulling everybody together, getting clarity on what is it that we're focused on, what are our goals. It might be getting people together, getting clarity on roles. Sitting the team down and saying, kind of, let's talk about our team agreements. It could be that maybe you need to spend a little bit more time if they're disconnected, getting some huddles together, doing some social interactions. I see it something in the chat here, Robert, and I'd like everybody to think about this. And if you want to put where you think your team is, that would be terrific.
Says, yeah, focusing on the end goals, the why,
Yep.
and leading with empathy makes a difference.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And leading with empathy, thank you for whoever said that, as one of those leadership qualities that's really emerged as very critical over the last 3 years. And being able to both as a leader drive results and have empathy as well, especially with that duality of understanding where people are at and what their needs might be. And that's with this, you also have to balance that with, we are running a business. And this is where some of my clients are really struggling right now. They've got people with mental health issues, family issues, and they are running a business. So, how do we really balance that? Anything else? Just take a minute and yes, I see another one. Sorry, Robert, I see another one come in. Thank you.
It says performing consensus of vision and buy-in on S&T and L&T goals, short-term and long-term goals.
Yeah.
Seasoned employees not willing to change.
That's an interesting. I wish we had more time to talk about not willing to change. Yeah, and as a leader, really painting that picture about why the need to change, what's in it for them. Wish we had more time in that. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and move on, but hopefully you're kind of thinking where your team is. I want to really do one last piece of this, which is psychological safety. And this is something that we found even more critical during this post-pandemic. And this may be a refresher for some of you. I see just one more thing in the chat, Robert. Thank you.
Yeah, it says we have the same problem. No one will step up to make the needed changes.
Yeah. And maybe that's something at the end when we open it up for Q&A. We can maybe talk about that, and maybe folks have some ideas. Want to talk a little bit about psychological safety. This is some research that Google actually did a number of years ago, and they wanted to understand, what high-performing teams look like at Google. And they studied, they did some questionnaires, they also did some observations, and what they found was that psychological safety was really the #1 predictor of effective teams. And they said it was really interesting because this can look like they would go around and observe some teams, and they would see some teams that didn't interact as much, but they had a lot of psychological safety. And then they would see teams that were kind of battling back and forth, and they had psychological safety also. But it's that team members feel free to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other. And why this is critical, and it actually started out with some work by a Harvard psychologist, Amy Edmondson, a number of years ago. And she was working on her doctorate, and she was collecting data about teams in healthcare settings. And her hypothesis was that the highest performing teams would have the less medical clinical errors. And when she started getting some of her data back, she actually was seeing the exact opposite, that high performing teams, or the highest performing teams, had the most clinical and data errors. And so she was confounded. She went and she started talking to the teams, observing the teams. And what she found was that the high performing teams were open about their errors. They were talking about them. And more importantly, they were talking about some of the root causes and what they could do to risk mitigate against those errors in the future. So it wasn't that they had more errors, but they were reporting them, and probably reporting them accurately. But it was really interesting around this notion of psychological safety. So, and a lot of the work has, again, correlated high-performing teams that get results have the highest psychological safety, because they're really working working openly together, debating, sharing information, not throwing people under the bus. And then here are just the other aspects of high performing teamwork that came out as well. And again, these are really similar to the pyramid, but also what came out here was around meaning and work being important to team members. So here's the book jacket. It's a great read, Amy Edmondson, and again, a little bit more detail on psychological safety. Are new ideas welcomed? Will my colleagues embarrass or punishing me for offering different viewpoints? And again, implicit in this is high performing teams. You really want those different perspectives. You want those different points of view. You really want to leverage that because that can help for a better outcome. Being okay to admit I don't know something. And really talking openly about some of the challenges, and this happened either during or post the pandemic. And this is the leader's role to really be able to create an environment for psychological safety. And some of the benefits, I've talked a little bit about this, is around information sharing, especially around information that not everyone knows. People, if they feel like there's an open environment, there's a good back and forth, more satisfied, more engaged, more learning behavior. So people will be more comfortable saying, gosh, we don't know about that. Let's go talk to other people. Let's go look at some of the best practices. We haven't, let's experiment with that. And then reflecting and looking at, what can we learn from that? Engagement and ultimately improve performance. And again, there's been a lot of research around this. That's been done, a lot of studies, and it is really clear, especially with some of the quantitative data in healthcare as well. And many big companies now and smaller companies are really driving towards this. Some have really embodied it in their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives as really promoting all voices being heard and having forums to really make sure those voices are heard. Some of the leader behaviors, and again, this is back to all of you. And this is around you as a leader, really setting that stage, clarifying expectations, especially that this is the type of environment that you want to promote. And I tell you, this just doesn't happen overnight. It's usually slowly or gradually, because people they'll do a little test. They'll put maybe a controversial a statement out there. They'll see what happens. If people are open to that, and then they'll do a little bit more. And part of the role for you as a leader also is to, if somebody does start to criticize another's behavior, for you intervening, or criticizing a comment, for you to intervene. And that emphasis on purpose, as we've talked about. The second one, situational humility. As the leader and as the team, you don't have to have all the answers. I think my generation, I think that was part of the leadership model. The leader needed to know all, and we know that's just that doesn't work. That's not true. And the opportunity now to really say that's okay, and to really look for others to have all the answers. Genuine curiosity. And this is around asking questions, and I put it practice inquiry. And again, this is really hard when you're tight deadlines, a heavy workload, and and it's just sometimes easier to just tell people what to do. But this is really asking questions. Why do you think that? What else haven't we looked at? And again, just really drawing that out in others. The other thing is implicit in psychological safety is really the mindset of looking at conflict as okay. And many people were really raised as needing and seeking harmony. And often as humans, we don't really like conflict. We avoid conflict, but looking at this as collaborative and as a way to get different points of view out versus adversarial. And the other thing, which we all did really well, I think, during the pandemic, was willing to risk and learn and destigmatize failure. In some industries and some companies, this is more difficult than others, but looking at failure as okay and how we can learn from that. And to set up processes to where you can really promote psychological safety, you can promote a really open environment, goes back to some of those team agreements and how we can really set the stage for that. So just a little grid here. As consultants, we like grids. Sometimes people think that having high psychological safety is just everybody's comfortable but it's really the antithesis of that. It's really where the teams are really pushing themselves, pushing into that high performance, ongoing reflection of how we're doing, what can we be doing, what can we be doing better. So really think about how you can really strive for that high performance and some of the things that we've talked about, and really as a leader being able to do that ongoing learning and reflection. This will be in what I send you as well. This is a little mini survey that Amy Edmondson developed and freely says, please use. I've had a lot of clients that have done this. You can just, rank on a 1 to 5 scale. Are you, about kind of the current state of psychological safety? And this is leading to some of the components. Again, making mistakes that, again, as a leader, there's some accountability, but it's also not held against you. I think the big thing is, as a leader, people can bring up problems, tough issues, bad news, and you look at it as an opportunity to problem solve. The third one is, again, promoting that diversity of thought, opinion, taking risks, getting the team to be asking others for help, to seeing that's okay, assuming best intent with people, and again, just utilizing people's talents. And this last one too is that one of the things that's also prompted the Great Resignation is sometimes people feeling like what they're doing doesn't have meaning or purpose, and also feeling like their skills and talents really are underutilized. And so this is the opportunity to kind of look at that, to get some of those things out, to get a conversation about that. So I'm going to stop there, and I think I'm going to take it off a slideshow and just see if what questions that you have. We've got about 10 minutes. What questions do you have? Any comments that you would have? And I think, Robert, you wanted them to put that in the Q&A, or if there's another vehicle.
Yeah, if you can put in if you have questions, go ahead and type those in the Q&A. You can find it at the bottom of your screen. It just helps us to make sure we're getting the questions answered. And Faith just put a note in the chat to remind everybody this is being recorded, and the materials, the slide deck and everything will be up on our website later today.
Yeah, I'm curious with a couple of the people that said, people aren't willing to step up and change. Maybe either if others of you had some thoughts for them, or if you wanted to expand on that, and I'll try to expand on that as well. Maybe while you're thinking, I'll take that on a little bit. One of the most powerful things that leaders can do around change is really helping people to understand why they need to change. And sometimes people are not changing because of fear. Fear that they got so used to being in their same routine, they were comfortable in it, they did really, really well, and they're afraid if they do something differently, they might fail. And so some of it is understanding why they might be reticent to change. And sometimes that's that psychological safety, that's that empathy somebody talked about, digging a little bit more deeply, and then looking at what you as a leader can do to create that environment where they may be more likely to change. And secondly, painting that picture as to why change is most important. And I see, yeah, there's a feeling that just opening up shop again to clients will result in increased business. But it's time to change the business models and funnels from before. It's hard to get leadership to accept that. Yes. Yes, that is. And that's that's the difficult one. Again, I go back to, exploring the difficulty in that, doing some analytics about the change in business model. And the other thing too is, maybe I'm big, and some of my clients are big on, let's do some experiments. Instead of feeling like we have to change everything, can we run a small experiment and kind of do this in a particular segment, do it for a little bit of time, collect some data and see how it's going. That's part of design thinking, is running experiments, and just really as a scientist would, and been getting a lot of traction with my clients on that.
And Deborah,
Robert, you look like you were going to say something. Yes.
yeah, there's another thing too, is in that last, in that comment that Michael put in there, is sometimes you can make those changes yourself, especially if you're not being micromanaged. And you can show that success. And then when you're in those conversations, then you can bring back, well, here's what I did to achieve this success. I think if we broaden it, then others can also do it by creating a new way of thinking.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And I think embedded in that, Robert, is sometimes this takes courageous leadership and just stepping up and and also you may be more empowered than you think you are.
We have some questions in the Q&A. So the first one is, how would you recommend bringing a team back together after they've disconnected due to distance and or outside distractions? Great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And when you say back together, I don't know if maybe that's in person. One of the things that I have a small team. And one of the things that I did, I had everybody over to my house. I tried, and this was a while back, and this was when it was nice and cool in Arizona. And I said, we're going to kind of hang out in the back. I brought some food in, et cetera. And, we just kind of reconnected. And then we did some planning. I would say if you're not able to bring everybody back in person, and it's a hybrid, you can try to do something similar to that as well, and try to connect people. And I would say first start with some kind of social things, maybe have a little bit of structure around it, and then to do some work-related things. And again, I would focus on kind of going back to the goals. Why are we here? Let's reconnect around our purpose, etc.
And it's tough to do remotely if everybody's still remote and you can't bring them back in together. Yeah. But it can be done. My wife works for a company that's been remote before the pandemic. Their whole model was built on remote employees, and so they've always had a lot of remote meetings where they're doing some social stuff as part of it, but they're also having business pieces of it, and so it can be done. You just have to be a little more creative.
Yeah, you do. And there's one of the great things, there's a lot more online now in terms of you can just Google virtual team building. I've just seen some wonderful ideas there that you can do. And I've had some clients that have asked their the team members to come up with ideas, etc., and do what's comfortable for your team. Second question, can you describe again what are the limits of making a group feel comfortable in a high-performing team? Well, I'm not sure there are any limits. Yeah, I hope I didn't say there were limits. Yeah, I don't think there are really any limits to that. And I think what high-performing looks like, I gave you a model, but getting people to talk about what high-performing looks like for us, And those team agreements, that's probably where you were thinking about, and having the group articulate their team agreements, how they want to work together. Talk about, if we were a high performing team, what would that look like? What would we be doing? What would we be doing now that's different? And get the team to really talk about that. And they'll tell you. I mean, one of the things also is, don't be afraid to ask the questions. You know, if you could say, I'm feeling disconnected with our team. What could we do to make us feel more connected? Again, don't feel like you have to have all the answers, and talk to your team about what that could look like. Thanks. Great questions. Anything else come up that I missed, Robert?
No, I think that's it. You got a couple more minutes for any other questions that people may have. But there's also no harm in ending a few minutes early if everybody gives a bit of time back in their day.
That sounds great. Well, and give people that recovery time to go to the next meeting. And that's another thing we've learned, is you just can't go, virtual Zoom or Teams back to back. You need a little bit of recovery time. So maybe we'll practice that. Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for being
such
on.
Good comments. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Good luck.
Glad to have Debbie with us. Debbie, thank you for the presentation. Great information. I want to thank our participants with great questions.
Yeah.
Those always bring extra knowledge to the conversations.
Yep.
So appreciate that. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up 3 minutes early, and let everybody get a little bit of time back in their day. And again, the presentation and recording will be available later. But again, thank you, Debbie. Thank you. And we'll talk to everybody soon. Hopefully we'll see you on Thursday at the workshop, or next Tuesday on the boot camp. Until then, we'll see you soon.
Great. Thanks again, everybody.